Now that we have our data set ready for analysis, let's actually look at the relationships between some of these variables. The first thing we need to do is get our perceived immediacy measure in a usable form. We have 14 individual scores that we hope are getting at this idea of perceived immediacy, but to really use it in our analyses, we need one perceived immediacy score for all of our participants. So to do that, we're going to take the average of each of those items. Now, in SPSS, you do this through compute variable. Like with our variables in the variable view, we can't put any spaces here in the target variable, which is what we're naming our new variable. So this will be our actual perceived immediacy measure. Now to calculate perceived immediacy, we can do a mathematical formula that actually creates the average. That's perfectly acceptable. SPSS also gives us a shortcut, though, when we're doing means. Instead, we can just type mean, perceived immediacy 1, 2, 3, 4. This tells SPSS that we want to take the mean of all those items and create a new variable in our data set that represents each participant's mean score on these 14 items. So I'm going to click OK. And here our output tells us that it has been done. And in our data set, here we see perceived immediacy. The nice thing about SPSS is it already knows that it should be a scale measure because all of the items that composed it were a scale measure. So now we can do some things with our data. We can actually test some hypotheses, answer some research questions. So let's say, for example, I would like to know just what the descriptive statistics are for my measure. I just want to take a good look at it. So again, I'm going to go to descriptive statistics. This time I want to look at the measure itself. So just as we did last time, I'm going to select what I want to look at. I'm choosing mean, standard deviation, max, min, kurtosis, and skewness, and click OK. And we see here we don't really have anything to be concerned about. The max and min are right. Standard deviation looks good. We're really not seeing any concerning skewness or kurtosis. So we're ready to move forward. So now let's say that I would like to know whether there is a correlation between someone's age and the amount of perceived immediacy that they perceive with their supervisor. So to do that, I'm going to go to Analyze. Analyze is where you have all of your statistical analyses. Okay, I'm going to, for the purpose of answering this question, go to Correlate and Bivariate, because this would be a bivariate correlation I need to run. A bivariate correlation between age and perceived immediacy. Move it over to my variables column. Click OK. And what do I see? I have a Pearson correlation of 0.09. Not actually statistically significant. Remember, this is our p-value here, so this would be less than 0.05 if the correlation was statistically significant. So no, there is no relationship between how much perceived immediacy one has with their supervisor and their age. Let's ask another question. What if I wanted to see if there is a difference between the amount of perceived immediacy one perceives with their supervisor and whether or not that supervisor engages in the use of emoticons when they're communicating through mediated communication? To answer this, I'm going to Analyze and Compare Means. Compare Means is where we have our t-test and our one-way ANOVA. Which t-test do we choose? Well, we have two groups of participants, right? We have a group that has supervisors who use emoticons and a group that doesn't. So that means that I'm going to choose an independent samples t-test. For my test variable, what I want to see if there's a difference, I use perceived immediacy. For my grouping variable, what I want to use as my group to see if there is a difference, I'm going to use the used emoticons. And here we have to define our group. And what it means by define groups is just say, what are the numbers we're looking at here? Because I have the option. I could run a t-test between just two groups in the number of years worked, even though we have 3 different groups there. I could run a t-test between the less than 1 year and the more than 5 years. So I need to tell SPSS which numbers of groups we're looking at, even though there are only 2 categories in this use of emoticons group. So now I click OK. And what do we see? Here we see actually that yes, there is a difference. There is a statistically significant difference in that supervisors who use emoticons are perceived to be statistically significantly more immediate than those who do not. It's rather interesting. Let me expand this output so you can see what the whole window looks at. Like. All right, let's say I want to ask one more question. I wonder if the amount of perceived immediacy you develop with your supervisor just increases over time. The more you get to know them, the more immediate you perceive them to be. Now I'm going to note here that you can use these same options in the output window. You don't always have to go back to your data set. So from the output window this time, I'm going to access the analyze. And again, I'm going to go to prepare means, and now I'm going to go to one-way ANOVA. My dependent list is going to be perceived immediacy. And my factor, what we're going to break everything down by, is years worked. Now, I'm going to select a post hoc because post hocs make it much easier to see what's actually going on in an ANOVA. LSD, Bonferroni, and Tukey are really popular just because they are so clearly laid out for us. So I'm going to select Tukey here. And what do we have? We don't have any statistically significant differences. Right? What our Tukey does for us down here is it actually creates columns for groups that do not have any statistically significant differences between them. So, for example, if there had been a difference in the 2 to 5 year group and the less than 1 year group, but not in the over 5 year group, we would have seen a second column that listed these 2 means over here. So that's how Tukey makes it nice and easy for us. In the post hoc test here, it would also put an asterisk by any groups that are different. But again, we don't see any differences here. But hopefully that shows you how to actually run these analyses. Let me know if you have any questions as you're preparing to analyze your own data sets.